This is Val Tapia from 38 IZ Videos. We're speaking with Geoff Tate, who is the former lead vocalist of a band called Queensryche, and who currently fronts a project of his called Operation Mindcrime. And right now we have on the phone Mr. Geoff Tate. Geoff, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great.
Good. Let's go ahead and get started. You just released a couple of days ago an album called The New Reality, and this is, if I'm correct, the third and final part of the trilogy of albums you've recorded over the past 2 years, starting with The Key in 2015, Resurrection in 2016, and again, now The New Reality now. Do you think everything met or exceeded your expectations in this project?
Yeah, it was an incredible project to be part of, and one that I'll always remember fondly. I had a lot of great collaborations with a number of different people on this record. A lot of different writers and players contributed to it, and I'm very happy with the results, and I can't wait to someday play it live.
Yeah, to talk a little bit about the songs, I noticed, I wanted to say, to my ears anyway, the second half of the record, there's quite a bit of instrumentation on it, and I would say, dare I say, more orchestral. Specifically a song called A Guitar in Church, a very unusual name, but it was instrumental and really a very dynamic piece, and very different for what I've heard your band do for some time, if not ever.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's one of my favorites too.
And what about the background of it? Was it Kelly Gray who wrote it, your guitar player?
No, I wrote that one actually.
Wow. And it led into, I guess, a song called All for What, and then Following the Wave. Really are very much again, in that progressive vein that you're very known for.
Yeah, that's a real strong section of the record there that I feel really good about.
Yeah. And tell us about what are some of your other personal favorites on the record?
I'm actually really in love with the whole record. Wow. I'm very pleased with it. Yeah. And actually the whole project was really an inspiration, and it turned out even better than I had anticipated.
Let me talk really quickly about the last record called Resurrection. There was a song called The Fight on the record, and probably one of the strongest tracks on there. What's the inspiration behind that record, or that song actually?
Let's see. Well, The Fight is about a subject. Of course, the whole album, all three albums tell a story. Right. And one of my big interests in life is human development and sort of anthropology. It's one of my hobbies, the study of human beings and how we get from where we started to where we are. And The Fight is about this thing with human nature where we're always trying to connect with someone else, and it's to I think it's because our nature is that we're naturally alone. We're solitary sort of animals who have a really strong need to bond with other people, and the fight is about that fight to connect with another person.
And yeah, that song was actually played on a tour you did earlier called The Whole Story, which was an acoustic tour that came through town here in Phoenix early March. What are your recollections of the tour, and how do you feel about it today?
Well, that tour was phenomenal. It was a wonderful experiment for me to kind of take my music and strip it down of all production and basically return the songs to where they started, which right. Almost every song I've ever written has been written on acoustic guitar or piano. Mm-hmm. And then as you develop it, you start adding instruments, and you just kind of change the whole way the song feels depending on the instrumentation that you pick. And so this was really kind of stripping all the songs back to their basic structure. Mm-hmm. And it was really fun to do, and it was all acoustic, and I used a whole different kind of technical setup than I've ever used before. And it kind of brought me back to the beginnings of why I started making music in the first place, was that interaction with the musicians I was playing with, and also interaction with the audience.
Yeah, I definitely want to get back to this song acoustically a little later, and talk about another song that really brought the house down, but I'll get to that in a little bit. I want to take you back. Let's all go back to 1982 to a degree. And your original managers in Queensryche, their names, I believe, were Kim and Diana Harris. They owned a record store in Seattle. And how did the band meet with them? And what do you think, was their role crucial for Queensryche in the early years?
Yeah, the record store that they had was called Easy Street Records. And back then, record stores were kind of a place where everybody met, to find out what was happening in the record industry, in the record world, and the music world, really. Record stores were kind of the centerpiece of where all the action was.
Right. And
Kim and Diana ran this really cool record store. They had all kinds of music from every genre possible. And they heard the first Queensryche demo and loved it, and thought that we could do something on an international level. So yeah, they were very instrumental in the beginnings of the success of the band.
And by any chance, have you had any contact with them in recent years?
No, I haven't seen them in many, many years, actually.
Interesting. As far as bands that Queensryche has toured, you guys have toured with many bands over the years, and it's almost like one of the most sought-after opening acts throughout the 80s. Tell us 3 of your personal favorite artists you toured with, and just maybe a brief story of each one.
Yeah, well, we did open up for many, many, many bands for many years, actually.
Right.
Probably more years opening for other bands than it was for us headlining our own shows, actually. Well, I have to say AC/DC probably was one of the most premier headliner bands that we ever opened up for. They were just phenomenal players, and actually phenomenal people, too. They really treated us well, and it was really fun being on that tour, because there was such a feeling of abundance, with the tour. The band was very open and giving, and they wanted to have a good time, and they wanted everybody around them to have a good time. So it was just very infectious, And I think when we toured with Iron Maiden, it was a wonderful experience with them, too. They were another band that was very giving and open to their opening acts, and treated them very well. Always gave you, plenty of stage room and lighting and sound and that kind of thing. When we toured with, who else did we tour with at the time? I'm thinking, Kiss was great too. Kiss treated us incredibly well, and were very open and allowed us, all the stage time we needed for our show. And they were very concerned about our show. They wanted the whole production to come across well, to the audience. So they treated their opening acts very well.
In retrospect, who was probably the most challenging audience of the 3, AC/DC, Iron Maiden, and Kiss? Who do you think, in your opinion, was the hardest to go up to play for?
You mean their audiences?
Yeah. Which audience probably gave you the most challenging audience of the 3?
Well, not really any of them. They weren't really a challenging audience. They were pretty much open to what we were doing. Wow. I would say probably the most challenging audience we ever opened up for was Metallica. That was a rough audience at that time.
Right.
But we managed to get through that. But it was a tough go at the start.
Right. Yeah. The first, actually, speaking of AC/DC, we're going to go talk about a little mishap that I believe the second time you were here, and this is from a first-person account. My cousin and a buddy of his, long story short, saw Queensryche open for AC/DC in August of 1986. here in Phoenix again, and there's at a place called Compton Terrace. And evidently, I guess the weather, we're known for the monsoon weather out here during that time, and Queensryche show, apparently all your equipment came crashing down as a result of that heavy storm. But you guys came out and did a very shortened set, a condensed set, and made the best of it. Do you recall that?
Oh yeah. That was actually an incredible situation where the whole PA and sound system that was all attached to the lighting rig, it all fell down around us, and it was amazing that not a single person was hurt. Nobody in the band or the production or the audience was hurt. Yeah. But the whole thing just collapsed. Right. And still to this day, I don't know how somebody didn't get hurt because people were diving to get out of the way, and the whole thing was coming down like a demolished building.
Right. Yeah, and as a result, but 2 months later, you guys came and did a show on your own, and you guys made kind of your home for a while here, a home away from home at the Celebrity Theater. You did a show on that tour again, the Rage for Order tour in 1986, and did a headlining show and nailed it and just assaulted the audience. And so that was very close to you guys coming back after that mishap that happened. And my cousin and my friend, or his friend, they had said they'd never seen anything like that ever happen before.
Yep, it was definitely crazy. I was just telling that story the other day to another person I was doing an interview with. It's funny that you bring that up.
Wow. Okay. Another little mishap here of fun. I mean, Phoenix has always been an interesting place for Queensryche. And fast forward to 2001, and wow! And it's at the Celebrity Theater. This is November 2001. Somebody decided to try to make off with one of Michael Wilton's guitars, and the cops, I guess, finally tackled him outside, or security tackled him outside, and it was quite an event. A 15-minute little debacle that happened. Oh,
yeah, that I didn't know about that, but that sort of thing has happened many times.
Oh, okay, yes, not the first one.
A funny kind of weird thing that happened with me is I had a very valuable saxophone on tour with me, and somebody stole it right off the stage. And I was so heartbroken because this was my favorite horn, and it had been with me a long time. And about 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in the dressing room at the House of Blues in New Orleans, and a security guard comes in with my saxophone case and says, "Hey, somebody just dropped this off at the stage door and said it was yours." And he sat it down, and I opened it up, and it was exactly how I left it, Wow. And I don't know how this happened, but the horn was stolen in New Jersey, but it ended up in New Orleans.
One of your favorite, actually your most favorite Queensryche record is a record called Promised Land. And I've talked to you about that in recent years. And what would you say about the record that you're most proud of? And it was a very introspective record, to say the least. What were the circumstances surrounding the band at the time?
Gosh, I heard most of that, but I didn't hear the last part of it.
Your recollections of Promised Land, the album, and it's the one you're most proud of from Queensryche.
Well, I have a lot of recollections. Actually, it was a pivotal point for the band at the time. It was we hadn't played together in many years after the Empire tour, and there was a lot of talk about the band splitting up at that point. I didn't really have a huge interest in continuing on at that point, and Chris, the guitar player at the time, came to me and pretty much talked me into making one more record with the band. And I said, well, if we're going to do one more record, then I think we should do it in a special way, and we should, try to kind of find some way to, come together, because we were pretty spread out at that time. And so we came up with this plan that we would go to this island, and we would all get together and live in this sort of communal environment in a cabin on the waterfront, and we would record this record based around some songs that I had been writing and Chris had been writing. And so in a way, that kind of happened. A couple of us ended up staying on the island the whole time, myself and Chris. Everybody else came up and did their part and left. But we ended up making this record that was really, really important to me at that time. And I think important to Chris as well. We really bonded over the making of that record.
If I had to pick, I would have to say that overall of all the material that Queensryche released over the years, something that doesn't get discussed enough to my thinking, from a critical standpoint, is how the strongest material that Queensryche arguably wrote with you, Geoff, you co-wrote with Michael Wilton. Empire, Spreading the Disease, Revolution Calling, Speak, The Needle Lies. What a track record. What was the difference between writing with, as you mentioned, Chris DeGarmo and Michael Wilton? How would you describe each one's writing style, and how were you able to work with them both during that time?
Well, they're very, very different people. Very different people. And so to communicate with each one was a different kind of process, you know. Chris was very communicative, and he could really describe, you know, what he was thinking about or what he was doing, you know, with a song, or if he had written the song, you know, what he wanted the song to sound like. He was very descriptive, and he had a definite idea on everything that he wanted to do. Michael, on the other hand, was not really a strong communicator. He would just sort of write some parts, you know, and then you could kind of put together something from what he wrote, you know, kind of string the parts together and form, you know, a song out of those parts. And he never really communicated much as to what he thought the thing would be. He just sort of left it up to whoever he was working with to come up with that conclusion. So it was kind of an open-ended kind of way of doing things. Right. And both ways work. You know, both ways are fine. It just depends on, you know, what you're looking for.
Anyway, back to the acoustic tour earlier this year. There was a moment in the show that I was really surprised at, and I wanted to bring this. You brought out a song for the first time actually on this tour, and I wish you would have played it back in 2003 with Queensryche. But anyway, a song called Blood. And to my ears, anyway, I mean, I got to say that the crowd response, arguably the biggest response of the night for a little-known song by probably the majority there, but the ovation that the song got, received was phenomenal, and the arrangement of the song was incredible, and one of perhaps your most poignant and compelling lyrics from the album Tribe. Can you give us a little bit of the story behind the lyrics? And again, the lyrics really went over a time, and it was pretty much post 9/11. You were singing about your observations of the time period and the aftermath of 9/11, and that song really does hit home surrounding the times.
Well, Blood is a song that I really love, and I always wanted to play live, and was really happy to finally be able to do that on this last year of touring. And it really was a crowd pleaser every night, partly because I think that it was something that people had never heard, you know, live, and they were excited. Longtime fans love to hear songs that they've never heard live before, as do I. I love playing songs that I've never played before on a tour. Secondly, Evan, my violin player, played an incredible solo on that song every night, and it was just beautiful to hear. And you know, it was one of those kind of solos that when people hear it, they just are blown away, and they respond in that manner, you know. And so I have to really give him a lot of credit for carrying that song every night and doing such a marvelous solo job on it.
And as far as the lyrical content, like I said, what was that inspired through the events of 9/11? Actually, it pretty much was, because to my ears, when I read the lyrics, I remember thinking, and hearing the lyrics, I remember thinking that it was arguably an indirect indictment of the people in political power at the time, and again in the aftermath of 9/11, but a very compelling piece.
Yeah, that was a strong lyric at the time that I
Yes.
felt was how do I describe it? I originally wrote the lyric as a letter to President George W. And it ended up being, instead of a letter, it ended up being a song. I'll put it that way.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely the highlight of the tour. Like that was a lot of the older fans, the diehard fans, were very shocked that was brought out to the set. So, if you had to pick, I guess the record that, how do I want to put this? The final record that you did with Queensryche, Dedicated to Chaos. What to you, do you stand by the record? It's not really one that gets discussed quite a lot from a fan standpoint, but I believe you probably stand by it to this day.
Oh yeah, I always stand by all my work. Yeah. That was an interesting record to make. It was probably the record that everyone in the band contributed the most to over the years. As with any band, you have certain people that write more than the others or are more involved than others. And that changes throughout the band's history, considerably, I think. And for Queensryche, there were certain members of the band that didn't contribute a lot when it came to making records. And that was a record where finally people were really contributing a lot to. If you look at the writing credits on the album, everybody in the band is involved. And so, it started out, we signed to a new record label. And they wanted us to make another record like Empire. They wanted a record that had a lot of singles on it because they were really planning on promoting the record at radio, which they felt at the time was the best way to really expose the band to a lot of people, And we hadn't had a big, commercial type record in a while. We had been writing more conceptual records and story albums and things that really weren't focused on singles, And so they really wanted us to focus on writing an album like the Empire album that was full of possible radio songs. So that's what we did. We really focused on creating, standalone songs that really weren't connected to each other, but were, kind of short in length and had catchy melodies and things like that, catchy rhythms. And so that's what that record is. I think there's like 15 tracks on the record. It's just chock full of all kinds of different kinds of songs, which is cool. And it's recorded really well, and it sounds great, and there's some really great music on it. Yeah. Unfortunately, when the record came out, the record company went out of business. So it never got a chance to be promoted at radio.
What would you say if you had to pick a couple of songs between Tribe and, let's say, American Soldier? The American Soldier record in particular, a song called A Dead Man's Words. Take us back to the making of that record and that song in particular, which was a highlight of the latter-day Queensryche shows.
Well, that record was a concept record that was based upon conversations I had with many, many, many different soldiers who served the United States in foreign wars. I interviewed over 300 different soldiers and got their stories. People that had fought in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Somalia, Desert Storm, Kuwait, just a whole bunch of different unique stories. And out of those stories, I wrote the lyrics to these various songs and tried to put them together in a way that gave the listener sort of an insight into what it's like to be a soldier. Mm-hmm. And so A Dead Man's Words was one of these particular songs about a soldier who had to go back in behind enemy lines and rescue some of his fellow soldiers that had been trapped behind enemy lines, and what it was like to go back through there and rescue these people. And a very powerful song, very powerful story, and a track that I think that people thoroughly enjoyed when we played it live.
Mm-hmm. And just a reminder, we're talking with former Queensryche vocalist Geoff Tate, and his latest project, Operation Mindcrime, has released an album called The New Reality, and in stores now. And just to wind this down, Geoff, what was, of the three of the trilogy, would you say, to go back to that, what was the most challenging for you to record of the three?
The challenging what?
The most challenging album to record of the three in the trilogy.
Well, all three were recorded at the same time. Mm-hmm. It was a massive amount of material that we did at the same period of time over the same month of recording. So I think the most challenging part of making the record was really the organization of it all, keeping track of who did what on what record and who played what part on what song, because right. It got really confusing because I think there's 4 or 5 different drummers on the record and several different bass players and a whole handful of different guitar players, several keyboardists beside myself playing on it as well. So there's a lot of contributions to it that had to be documented and kept track of.
Mm-hmm. And why don't we go ahead and say who's in the band currently who participated on the record?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Who participated on the record this time? You had Kelly Gray, who's been a longtime member, also a member of Queensryche with you. Is Randy Gaines still part of the band?
Well, it never was a band. It was a project that was put together to perform this trilogy.
Right.
And Randy played on the first 2 records.
Correct.
I was on the first 2 records a bit. I don't think he was on the third.
Yeah. Okay. And well, anything else, Geoff, you want to add? I don't believe you're coming to Phoenix soon because you guys will be heading to Europe in 2018, and if I read correctly, you guys will be going to. You probably won't be starting a U.S. tour until late 2018. Is that correct?
Yeah. We start in Dublin, Ireland, on the 18th of January, mm-hmm. and primarily concentrating on Europe until spring.
Right.
And then taking a short break in the springtime, and then resuming touring again in the fall of 2018. So we'll be heading into America at that time.
Great. All right, Geoff, I'll go ahead and let you go. Thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure and honor speaking to you. And anytime you get the urge to come do an acoustic set at a station, 38 IZ Videos will be glad to have you on here, and we'll have you guys play a couple songs in here.
Oh, excellent. Well, great talking with you, Val, and have happy holidays, and see you on the road, okay?
All right. Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yep.